Hey folks, my name is Brad. Welcome to another countdown edition. Today we're going to talk about Rick Springfield's studio albums. That's right, I've been a fan since I was a teenager, and when most people hear that, they say out loud,
God, you mean the Jesse's Girl guy?
but you don't understand. He is so much more than that. Most people don't know how great of a songwriter Rick Springfield is and always has been. He is so much more than Jesse's Girl. He has pumped out 16 studio albums over the last 40 plus years. His 17th one is coming out this summer. And like I said, I don't think anybody on YouTube has ever counted down Rick Springfield's albums in order of best to worst, or I guess in this case, we're going to go worst to best. So without further ado, I'm going to do it for you right here. And remember, this is just my opinion. I'd be curious to hear yours as well. Coming in at number 16 is Rick Springfield's second studio album from 1973. It's Comic Book Heroes. It, in my opinion, is clearly the worst Rick Springfield album that he has ever done. The music is, how do I explain it? Very 70s, very, like almost too 70s, because you'll find out later that I actually like a couple of his albums from the 70s before anybody knew who he was. But Comic Book Heroes is not that album. It starts off with a song called Comic Book Heroes, the title track, Comic Book Heroes. And then I was thinking of the second track, I'm Your Superman. It just really schmaltzy. And don't get me wrong, nobody did schmaltzy more often than Rick Springfield did in the 1970s, but this is clearly the worst of the worst from Rick Springfield. Number 16, Comic Book Heroes from 1973. Number 15 is, it was very close to the bottom for me because it is not very good either, were it not for the two top 30 singles and one top 5 single that came from this album. It's the Hard to Hold soundtrack, the very first Rick Springfield movie called Hard to Hold, which was also god-awful. But it did produce 3 good hits. Of course, the number 5 smash, Love Somebody, that everybody knows that he still plays to this day in concert. And of course, Bop Till You Drop and Don't Walk Away. The album also contained the songs Taxi Dancing, a duet with a gal named Randy Crawford, and another song that Rick Springfield has played off and on throughout the years at his live shows called Stand Up. But the rest of the album is complete garbage. Garbage. Number 15 of the worst to best Rick Springfield albums is Hard to Hold from 1984. Footnote worth mentioning, Rick Springfield only did 7 of the 10 songs on Hard to Hold. There were 3 songs, one each by Graham Parker, Peter Gabriel, I'm sure you know him, and Nona Hendrix. And so it wasn't entirely Rick Springfield's fault that this album sucked. Number 14 is one of Rick Springfield's more recent albums from 2016. It's when RS went country with the album Rocket Science. This is, without a doubt, at least in my opinion, his most average album of all average albums. There are some decent songs on it. The title, or I should say the opening track, Light This Party Up. The following track, Down. Miss Mayhem is okay. There's a song that's been around a while that he finally redid and put on an album officially called Let Me In. I like that song. But for the most part, this album is just not very good in my opinion. I never got into it, and I just tried again recently and just couldn't even finish it. So without further ado, at number 14 of the worst to best Rick Springfield albums, it's Rocket Science. Coming in at number 13, another album that is very average, yet not quite as average as Rocket Science. It's 2008's Venus in Overdrive. This album has a great opening track, What's Victoria's Secret. It was a really good song. I remember when I first heard it before the album came out, I was really hopeful for what the rest of the album would sound like. And when it came out, I was so disappointed. There are some other decent songs on there, like I'll Miss That Someday, Venus in Overdrive. But for the most part, the album fails to deliver. I remember very specifically saying to some friends about how the album just feels like an album-oriented rock album, very just average, and really skewed towards the female perspective, or the female market, I should say. So this album just didn't do it for me, and that's why it's at number 13. It's 2008's Venus in Overdrive. Coming in at number 12 is a more recent album from Rick Springfield from 2018. This is The Snake King. The Snake King tour was the last time I saw Rick Springfield in concert. He definitely played some of these songs. It has a more bluesy feel to it, and definitely not the worst album I've ever heard from him, obviously. Coming in at number 12, there are some good songs: Blues for the Disillusioned, Santa is an Anagram, The Devil That You Know, Orpheus in the Underworld. There are some great songs on this album. Great's probably not the right word. There are some solid songs on this album, but it's clearly not one of his best. And unfortunately, that's been the tale of the tape here the last 20 years with Rick Springfield albums. The good ones have been few and far between, but there's definitely some nuggets if you know where to look for them. So, number 12 from 2018, The Snake King. Coming in at number 11 is an album from the 70s. It is 1976's Wait for Night. I remember getting a copy of this album in the 80s, and I didn't know for sure. I guess I never read what it said in the copyright of the album cover and the album itself. I didn't know this album was for the 70s. I thought it was from somewhere in the 80s. The thing about Wait for Night is it has a less goofy feel to it than Comic Book Heroes. It's a more polished, more rock, straight down the road, oriented, and it's got some great songs. You quote "Take a Hand," "Gold Fever." There's solid songs. Jessica is another great song. Old Gangsters Never Die. The songs just hold up a lot better on Wait for Night than they do on Comic Book Heroes, which is why I put it at number 11 of the greatest Rick Springfield albums of all time. From 1976, it's Wait for Night. Starting the top 10 is Rick Springfield's one other solo album from the 70s. It is his very, very first one from 1972. You're going to love this picture if you've never seen it. Here's the album cover for Beginnings. That's right, folks. There's Rick Springfield looking like David Cassidy in 1972. Now, it's funny that I complain about Comic Book Heroes being very schmaltzy, cheesy, 70s sounding, because without a doubt, Beginnings has just as much of a feel of the 70s feel as Comic Book Heroes. But there's something about the songs that I feel deliver. You can really hear his influences in many of these songs. What Would the Children Think, right? The Unhappy Ending sound very Beatles-esque to me. You know, if you know anything about Rick Springfield, you know how heavily influenced he was by the Fab Four. Even the lead track, even though it's a slow song, Mother Can You Carry Me, actually kind of reminds me of something the Partridge Family might have done back in the 70s. My favorite song on that album is I Didn't Mean to Love You. It's a very bluesy country feel to it. It's a great song that I wish to God he would try to do live in concert once these days, but you never hear any of these songs. If you're lucky, you hear the single, a God-driven song, a almost Christian rock kind of song, if you might go with that. Speak to the Sky is, of course, the single from that album. But my number 10, starting the top 10 of Rick Springfield albums, is Beginnings from 1972. It's the top 10 from here on out. We are at number 9 on the Rick Springfield Worst to Best albums of all time, according to me. Rick Springfield's number 9 album from 1985 is his Tao album. This is where he got experimental with electronic drums and additional keyboard sounds and things of that nature. I read recently where he believes this was his best album. I can understand why he thinks that, but to me, it's the number 9 album of all time. It's got some great songs. He didn't really produce any big hits from this album. Celebrate Youth and State of the Heart were both singles that made the top 30, but they certainly weren't as powerful as songs like Jesse's Girl and Human Touch, Affair of the Heart, which we'll get to here later on in the countdown. There was a couple of great album tracks on this album as well that nobody ever heard. Occasionally you'll hear him in concert play this song, or at least play some of this song. Written in Rock is a fantastic song about heartbreak and loss. And also the song Walk Like a Man. And of course, his second tribute to his late father wraps up this album at the end, called My Father's Chair. It's just him and a piano, and it's a beautiful song. He still plays that one in concert to this day as well. So I like this album quite a bit. Number 9, it's from 1985. It's Rick Springfield's Tao. At number 8, even though this album was never supposed to happen, it did happen. It's a Rick Springfield solo album, and we've got to put it on here. At number 8, it's Rick Springfield's Beautiful Feelings. This album actually only came to play when Mercury Records had dumped Rick Springfield, and Rick Springfield went to RCA, became popular in the early to mid 80s with Jesse's Girl and Don't Talk to Strangers and songs like that. Mercury Records had a bunch of tapes in the can and decided to go ahead and rework some of these songs with Rick Springfield's vocals, redo some of the instrumentation, and release an album, a Rick Springfield album, on their own to capitalize on his newfound fame. And I'm sure he's not happy about it. It's not the worst album in the world, though. And of course, it had the top 30 hit Bruce, where he makes fun of himself for being mistaken for Bruce Springsteen. It's a fun song if you've never heard it before. There's a cover on there for the song Just One Look. Also, a couple of my favorite songs on the album are The Solitary One and Spanish Eyes. It's a nice collection of songs that were actually recorded back in the late 70s between Wait for Night and whatever his next album was after Wait for Night. My mind is escaping me. I think there was a bit of a delay there for a while. But anyway, it's a nice album. If you've never heard it or checked it out, you probably should. At number 8, it's Rick Springfield's Beautiful Feelings. Coming in at number 7 is the comeback album. In 1999, it is the album Karma. After an approximate 10-year absence from the music industry, Rick Springfield came back with the single It's Always Something, released this new album Karma, and started touring again. I remember very well seeing him in concert around this period as well in Kansas City, and he did not disappoint. And frankly, I don't think he's stopped touring since then. The album overall is good. It's solid. He's got a lot of co-writes on the album with people like Jeff Silverman, Tim Pierce, and Jim Valance, to name a few. Other songs worth noting on this album are the song Prayer, White Room, Ordinary Girl, In Veronica's Head, and my favorite song is actually the hidden track at the end of the album that's not even available on Spotify for some reason. It's called Hey Maria. I used to think it was called It's a Big Beautiful Friday Night, but I think the song is actually called Hey Maria. There's some great songs, 13 tracks in all with the hidden one, and it's definitely an album worth checking out. Again, number 7 on my top 16 of Rick Springfield albums, worst to best. It's Karma. We are really getting into the nitty-gritty now. We are at number 6. It is the juggernaut, Success Hasn't Spoiled Me Yet. Number 6 on my list of the Rick Springfield albums, worst to best. This, of course, has Don't Talk to Strangers. And if you shift back to the album Beautiful Feelings, you'll note there's a song on there that I mentioned called Spanish Eyes. That song was actually Don't Talk to Strangers before it was Don't Talk to Strangers. I forgot to mention that earlier, but I'll mention it right now. Go ahead and listen to Beautiful Feelings in the song Spanish Eyes, and you'll notice the same guitar riff that became Don't Talk to Strangers. And honestly, some of the melody is the same too in the verse. It's very interesting. But anyway, back to Success Hasn't Spoiled Me Yet. I remember listening to this cassette tape over and over and over again in my car, in my friend's car. Great songs, powerful. You got Calling All Girls as the opening track. I Get Excited, the ballad What Kind of Fool Am I? Christina, which is actually a rewritten version of the Bachman-Turner Overdrive song Jamaica. It's the strangest thing because I remember hearing it on the radio back in the day, Jamaica, take me away. And I'm like, well, that's Rick Springfield's song, Christina. No, Brad, it was the other way around. He actually ripped off Jamaica, giving him credit, of course, where credit is due, and wrote a song called Christina. Take me away with you. The cover, Black is Black, is on there. It's probably the low point on the album. It probably wasn't necessary. They could have gone with something else or maybe not even had that extra track on there. Still Crazy for You is a great song. The American Girl. My personal favorite on the album is the song called Tonight. If you've never heard that one, it's definitely worth checking out. So, number 6, Success Hasn't Spoiled Me Yet, my 6th favorite Rick Springfield album of all time. We've gotten this far, we've gotten to the top 5, and at this point you might be thinking to yourself, Brad doesn't like any of Rick Springfield's newer albums. And I'm telling you, that's not true, especially not as we look here at number 5 from 2012. This is the album Songs for the End of the World. I was really happy when this album came out. It had multiple covers, multiple album covers that you could get. It was still around that period where people were buying CDs, and so you could get a choice of what cover you got if you went to the store and bought it. But the songs are strong throughout this entire record. The opening track, Wide Awake, Our Ship's Sinking, is one that I know he played in concert a lot. I Hate Myself. Just some great songs. Love Screws Me Up, a very intelligent song. It's definitely One Way Street, another great song. It's definitely an album you should check out if you are a Rick Springfield fan. In fact, there are only 2 albums that I would tell non-Rick Springfield fans to check out. If they're not going to check out the 80s music, they want to check out more recent ones, this would be one of them, and the other one I will tell you about here in a little bit. But number 5 on my list of Rick Springfield albums is Songs for the End of the World. Time for another 80s classic. At number 4, you can't beat it when Ron, his dog, is on the cover. It's Working Class Dog, the one that really started it all for Rick Springfield with the song Jesse's Girl. But as I said at the top of this video, he is so much more than Jesse's Girl. And if you have not checked out some of these songs, even from the 80s, that are really well written, you really should, because there's some good ones on this album as well. Love Is All Right Tonight is another great, fun party naked kind of song, for lack of a better way of saying it. Hole in My Heart is a great ballad. Carry Me Away, the Sammy Hagar song, I've Done Everything for You. A lot of people don't know that song was the Sammy Hagar song first, but it was, and somehow it ended up on Rick Springfield's 1981 album. The second side of the album back in the day, some good songs too. Red Hot and Blue Love is an amazing piece of rock composition, I guess, for lack of a better term. You cannot go wrong with checking this album out. It's probably the first one that I would send people to get a feel for what else Rick Springfield had in his arsenal back in the day of Jesse's Girl. Number 4 on my list of Rick Springfield albums is Working Class Dog. I'll tell you what, I'm not going to lie to you. Picking these top 5 or so was not an easy task for me. They are all my favorite Rick Springfield albums, and I had to be very particular about what and why I picked each album for each slot in particular. But number 3, another 80s album. It's the one that started, or I should say, ended the first leg of his popularity. It was 1988's Rock of Life. This album was at an interesting period in his life. He, of course, had been married, had his first child, was going through a lot. It was just really kind of a different feel of an album, and that's in a good way. The songs are direct, to the point, angsty without sounding like Nirvana. They are probably the deepest songs that Rick Springfield had ever written and recorded up until this period in his life, and arguably, possibly throughout his entire career. The song Rock of Life, Honeymoon in Beirut, World Start Turning, they're all very deeply personal, and you can hear it in the lyrics. The song Woman, probably one of my favorites on the record. And at the end, once again, Rick likes to throw in cover songs. This one was kind of fun because I didn't know the original. It's a song called If You Think You're Groovy. It's kind of a fun way to end the album. But overall, top to bottom, Rock of Life is a really good Rick Springfield album. And on top of it all, the biggest disappointment is, if I recall correctly, he was in an ATV accident shortly before the Rock of Life tour started, hurt himself really badly, and canceled the entire tour and never did tour for Rock of Life, and honestly didn't tour again until 1999 when he released the aforementioned Karma. So number 3 on my Rick Springfield list of albums is Rock of Life. If you're keeping track at home, you know there are only 2 albums left. Which one's it going to be? Is it going to be the one from the 80s or the one that's left from the 21st century? Well, I'll tell you right now, number 2, it was not an easy pick, but number 2 for me is 1983's Livin' in Oz. I always love this cover too. I don't know, it's got the 5 o'clock shadow and the kind of spiky hair, which obviously I've never had in my life. But really, the songs on this album are all written by Rick Springfield and Rick Springfield only. There are no covers. I shouldn't say that. They're actually, Affair of the Heart actually did have a co-write. There's an interesting story about that, but it was actually written originally by a guy named Danny Tate and Blaze Toasty, or Toasty. We'll say Toasty because it's funny. And Rick Springfield actually took a part of that song and turned it into Affair of the Heart and basically rewrote the entire thing. So in theory, there is one song that's a co-write, but the rest of them are written by Rick Springfield entirely, and they do not disappoint. Of course, there's the hit Human Touch, the hit Affair of the Heart, the hit Souls, and then all the albums, or all the songs on this album, I'm so excited when I'm talking about Livin' in Oz, are good songs. Let me name them for you. You can just tell by the titles that these songs are good. The second track is Allison. It's a really, really sexy tale about getting wrapped up with a woman that he is shooting a movie with or shooting a TV show with, who's married. There's the song Livin' in Oz. The title track is one of the better songs on the album that wasn't a single. Me and Johnny is a great song about his younger days living in Australia. Motel Eyes is a fantastic, sexy song. Tiger by the Tail, Souls, I've already mentioned. I Can't Stop Hurting You. And Like Father, Like Son, that only has a strings accompaniment in the background. It's just a phenomenal album for 1983 and Rick Springfield. That is why it is number 2 on my list of Rick Springfield albums. So we've made it to the top, and if you are a Rick Springfield fan, you've got a pretty good idea as to which album this is going to be. But if you're not a Rick Springfield fan, let me tell you, this is really where I think you should start when it comes to Rick Springfield. I think that if you don't understand who he really is, and all you think about with Rick Springfield is Jesse's Girl, you've got to start with my number 1 Rick Springfield album, Shock, Denial, Anger, Acceptance. This album is, without a doubt, if you know anything about Rick Springfield, it is his least favorite album, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. I could sit here and run through all 17 track names, and you probably won't know any of them because there really wasn't a very big hit at all on this album. There was a single. It was called Will I. It's a great song. It's probably a great one to start with, but it's actually the 3rd track. The opening track, Perfect. I'll Make You Happy is the 2nd track. There's a song called God Gave You to Everyone. I Don't Want Anything From You. Jesus Saved. Let me tell you, those first 8 songs on that album just rock it right through you. And that's what I remember most about this album when I first heard it, was how it shook my speakers whenever I played it. Constant tempo. Every song was a get up and go. And I was just like blown away. And so were my friends. We're like, this is Rick Springfield's best album from 2004, by the way. I didn't mention that. 2004 is when Shock, Denial, Anger, Acceptance came out. It was 5 years after he had released his comeback album, Karma. And the reason that this album is his least favorite is interesting. If you're a big Rick Springfield fan like I am, you've probably read his autobiography. And inside that autobiography, he tells a lot of truths about himself. The worst one of all is probably his infidelity issues. Rick Springfield loved women and loved to sleep with them. And there was a period in his life when he first made his comeback that he ended up in Vegas doing a show for a few years, if I recall correctly. I had no idea this had happened until I read the autobiography. And during that period, he started an affair with a much younger girl than he. And it was turned very, very serious, if I recall correctly. And during that period of that affair, when he was alone in Las Vegas, away from his family, doing this gig in Las Vegas on the Strip, he wrote and recorded all of these songs, or at least wrote and demoed all of these songs. And for the most part, a lot of these songs talk about the affair in a roundabout way. And so, again, I'm recalling from my reading of the autobiography, this is why he and his wife both do not like this album, because they are both aware of where those songs came from, and it's not a very good place for their marriage and their relationship. It's interesting because Shock, Denial, Anger, Acceptance cannot be found on Spotify, or I don't think anywhere streaming online. I don't understand why that is. I don't know that Rick Springfield can have that kind of power to not have that album available anywhere. Maybe deep down inside, he knows it's his best album, and the label or his management has decided to take it off of streaming and force anybody that wants it to buy it. I don't really know. All I know is that you cannot stream it on Spotify, and that's a huge disappointment for me, because I would like to be able to share it with more people, because it's such a fantastic album. There's a reason why it's my #1 Rick Springfield album. Let me tell you a few more of the songs on there. My favorite song on that album is a song called Wasted. The song is barely 3 minutes long, and I'm pretty sure as you hear the lyrics, you can understand that that song is most likely about him and his girlfriend on the side during that time period in the early 2000s. But it's a really, really good song. There are just a ton of good songs on here that, again, go very, very deep into Rick Springfield's psyche. Every Night I Wake Up Screaming is another one of my favorite songs. Again, as I said, 17 songs on this album, and not a one of them suck. You just cannot go wrong with Shock, Denial, Anger, Acceptance. It is my #1 Rick Springfield album of all time from 2004. So what do you think about my list? Do you agree? Do you disagree? I would love to hear more from you. Comment down below and let me know your thoughts. And stay tuned, because maybe someday you may hear me doing the worst song on each of Rick Springfield's albums. Also worth mentioning before I go, let me tell you, Rick Springfield has his 17th studio album coming out this summer in August, shortly before he turns 74. It's going to be called Automatic, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does this time, and it'll be fun to try to put that inside this countdown somewhere. We'll see how it turns out. See ya!